So as you all know, Bernie Sanders, of course, officially suspending his presidential campaign yesterday, and mid-morning gave a speech to his supporters about the path forward and how important the movement was and next steps, where we go from here. Apparently, though, CNN wasn't impressed with it, Saagar.
No, they certainly weren't. Let's take a listen to what they said.
What struck me the most there is Senator Sanders, in saying goodbye, did acknowledge that Joe Biden had an insurmountable lead, but he didn't say anything nice about Joe Biden. He did not say he'd spoken to him. He did not say he would work with him. He said it was imperative to beat President Trump, but there was no big embrace of Joe Biden. He said nicer things about Joe Biden back during some of the Democratic debates than he said in saying goodbye.
It was really noteworthy that was not part of his message at all. In fact, it's funny you say that. As he was speaking, I was texting with people in and around Joe Biden asking if he had gotten a phone call because it was so glaringly absent.
Okay, let me read you a quote from Bernie's concession speech. Bernie, quote, "I congratulate Joe Biden, a very decent man." There you go.
Seems pretty good.
Joe Biden will be the nominee. And saying he will work with Joe Biden in order to defeat Donald Trump.
We all know what's going on here. They see the weakness of Joe Biden.
Yeah.
They see that this is far from in the bag, in spite of the fact that they relentlessly crammed down our throats that this was the electable candidate. But now that they've got their electable candidates, then they're like, oh no, this guy may not be what we bargained for. We may end up with 4 more years of Trump. So they have to preemptively go ahead and start laying the groundwork to be able to blame Bernie, even though he got out of the race. When they asked him to get out, he gets out of the race. We all know he's going to endorse Joe. He says he's a decent man. Right. He has genuine, warm feelings about him. I'm sure he'll go and campaign for him just like he did many, many times for Hillary Clinton. But they have to go ahead and lay that groundwork so that they can blame him and blame his supporters later on if Joe doesn't.
I was actually dumbfounded because they're doing the Hillary maneuver already, literally in immediate response. Yeah. They're like, and I'm like, he literally said, "I congratulate Joe Biden, a very decent." I mean, he said that. What are you supposed to do? Bow down before and prostrate yourself before Joe Biden? I mean, but even then, look, we said this here on the show. No matter what you do, and this is why I was always critical of Sanders for being like my friend Joe and all this, no matter how much you do that, they will blame you for daring to challenge the king. And that is, he will never get it through his skull that they hate him so much that no matter how much goodwill that he gives to the other side, that they'll use it to hang him. And it's just,
Of course. And there was another interesting sort of laying of this groundwork from Matt Iglesias over at Vox. I don't know if you saw this
piece. I saw it.
But his basic point, and some of what he was saying was correct, that it's going to be hard to win over Sanders faithful because they just, even if Joe came out for Medicare for all today, I wouldn't believe that he's actually going to push for that. He has no trust of the base. That part of it is true. But he's basically saying, don't bother even trying. And even if Bernie does the right thing, because this is the new, Bernie got out at the right time, so he actually did the right thing, that Bernie-aligned media was going to be feeding the base. And so it may be out of Bernie's hands, but it's still going to be Bernie and his movement's fault if Joe loses. So he's both arguing they shouldn't bother, don't even try to reach out to Bernie supporters. It's a waste of your time. Don't even try. And then it'll ultimately be their fault. It's just a full service economy here.
It is a full service thing. And that is the funny part is you look at that ground being laid because there's people like Iglesias who wrote that. He's like a Bernie. I guess he's sympathetic. I don't know what he is. He said Bernie was great, but he was a huge Hillary shill. So what do I know?
It's confusing.
It's very confusing. But there's a groundwork being laid to blame people for voting their conscience. And I remember the same thing happening on the right, but that time around, the media hated Trump so much that they were encouraging and lifting up all these annoying never Trump voices, which are now, by the way, a core part of the Biden coalition. So congratulations, everybody. You now are the party of Max Boot. Please
Jennifer
take it.
Rubin.
Keep him forever.
Thanks.
And I'm looking at that, and I'm seeing that in this time around, they're demonizing. Because, again, and this is the funny thing, Trump understands this too. His first immediate tweet was to Bernie supporters, remember, we're aligned on trade. I'm with you. Come on over here. They stole it from him again. He perfectly sees that political dynamic. But the media is trying to shame people into voting for Joe Biden, despite the fact that Joe Biden does not align with anything they believe. And yet, whenever it was Trump and there were people on the Republican Party, some very small part of the Republican Party, that didn't want to vote for Trump, they wanted to elevate them. So these are the moral voices, these are the people carrying the forward.
And you know what effect it has? It doesn't really change people's votes. I mean, I'm sure some people maybe change their votes, but for most people, it doesn't change their votes, but it might change what they tell a pollster. And that's how you end up with these polling disparities like what we saw with Trump, which it doesn't have to be, and it actually wasn't a massive polling disparity. It only takes a few points of people who are sort of embarrassed because they've been vote shamed to tell pollsters who they're really going to vote for. But in the privacy of the voting booth, they're going to do whatever they want. They're not going to be shamed into. In fact, I think that there are, for some people, the fact that they're being like bullied and shamed and cajoled into voting the right way, as if someone is entitled to their vote, I think it actually encourages them to go in the opposite direction. It's kind of like a screw you. David Axelrod also picked up on, of course, he is with CNN, so not surprising that he picked up on the CNN messaging here that if Bernie's goal is to defeat Trump, he's going to have to make a more affirmative case for Biden and why his supporters should support him. I mean, come on, guys. It was a day that Bernie Sanders got out. This was a message, first and foremost, to his movement about what they've accomplished. And you can't even in that moment, like, give him the space without saying you must instantly bend the knee and slavishly praise the man who's just vanquished you. It's just unreasonable.
Hillary didn't do that. And she never got any of that criticism, I guess, just because Obama won. I mean, anybody else remember that 2008 concession speech? I don't think she barely mentioned Barack Obama. All the glass ceiling, all this, nonsense. And it was the same thing. And she went all the way until June. I mean, Bernie dropped out early on. He said, we're in the middle of a crisis. I don't want to keep this thing going. I'm going to drop out. Joe Biden will be the nominee. I mean, he did all that you're basically supposed to do as a vanquished opponent. And again, just to look at the treatment. When Ted Cruz doesn't say he'll back Trump, or Marco Rubio, the same people, they were elevated by the media. They were heroes. They were people voting their conscience. All of this standing up to the big bad orange man.
True.
And on this time around, Bernie going way farther than Cruz and many others ever did in favor of Trump. They're vilifying him already. That's the dynamic of that. Just shows you exactly whose team that these people play on when it going gets tough.
Compare Bernie's dropout to Elizabeth Warren.
Right.
Oh, gosh, I mean, and think about, first of all, it was all, we can't dare to tell her that she should get out of the race, right? She needs her space, and her supporters need their space and time, all like 8% of them or whatever. So there's that piece. And then there's also going to be this massive, we're already seeing it, this massive media narrative about what a failure Bernie Sanders was. Well, Bernie Sanders was the only one of it. Pete and Kamala and Beto, Amy, Liz, all these people failed out of the race. And there was never any of like, their way of doing politics was a disaster. And we can never do that again because that was terrible. And they were too X or too Y or too Z for the electorate. Even though Elizabeth Warren literally could not win her own state, won one county in Iowa, but she's treated with kid gloves and she's elevated, and now they're saying maybe she should be vice president. Biden's never going to pick her for vice president. Maybe she should be vice president. She should lead the coronavirus response. We should elevate her, when she dramatically underperformed what anyone thought that she would ultimately do in this race.
And again, remember, what was the media narrative coming out from Elizabeth Warren's dropout? She needed her space. She needs to live her truth.
Self-care.
They all needed self-care, blah, blah. When Bernie comes, and there was never like, hey, are you going to support, Bernie Sanders? Are you going to, do this? Are you going to align with your politics? What happened to all of these things that you always said that you believed? None of that.
Right.
It was, often she broke the glass ceiling by winning one county in Iowa. And it was all, all these little pinky promises. And it was just like the nauseating way that the press corps treated that.
And it was all blaming the voters, too, of like, it's all sexism.
America's just too sexist.
She was perfect. We just didn't deserve her. That was the problem.
That was always the issue. But they're going to keep it up. That's just a little preview of a taste for some of you to come. But there we go.
Should be great. We'll have more Rising for you after this.